I would just encourage you to listen to previous messages or just get in the Word and read chapters 1 through 6, because today we're going to work on chapter 7. And last Wednesday, we heard about, we witnessed Esther holding a banquet for her and the king and Haman, and we heard about her invitation for a second banquet for the following day. And so this is going to take place at the second banquet. But first, I want to welcome anybody that is listening to Redemption Life Center here at 28906 East Admiral Place in Catoosa, Oklahoma. And we meet on Sunday mornings for a regular church service at 10:30. And then on Wednesdays, we do a Bible study at 7:30. And so you're welcome to join us anytime, and I hope that what you hear blesses your heart and helps you understand what God is trying to tell us in His Word in the book of Esther. So we're going to start out, I think, if we can, I'm going to have Josie read first from the Living Word, and I'll have Dave read from the King James, and then I will read from the Amplified after that, and we will read several verses and then have a discussion and keep going until we get to the end of the chapter. And depending on when we end the chapter, we may start the next one, because this chapter is only 10 verses long, so it's not going to take us long to get through it. So we'll just wait and see what happens. Let's start out with verses 1 through 4. Okay, Josie?
So the king and Haman came to Esther's banquet. Again, during the wine course, the king asked her, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? What do you wish? Whatever it is, I will give it to you, even if it is half of my kingdom." And at last Queen Esther replied, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it please your majesty, save my life and the lives of my people, for I and my people have been sold to those who will destroy us. We are doomed to destruction and slaughter. If we were only to be sold as slaves, perhaps I could remain quiet, though even then there would be incalculable damage to the king that no amount of money could begin to cover."
Thank you. Verses 1 through 4, please, Dave.
So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, "What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the hall of the kingdom." Then Esther the queen answered and said, "If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondsmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage."
Thank you. Amplify says, "So the king and Haman came to dine with Esther the king. And the king said again to Esther on the second day, when wine was being served, What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted. And what is your request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then Queen Esther said, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, slain, and wiped out of existence. But if we had been sold for bondmen or bondwomen, I would have held my tongue, for our affliction is not to be compared with the damage this will do to the king. Do we have any comments? I find it interesting that she kind of built things up to a climax and got their curiosity up at a peak, because the day before she invited him to a banquet, and with the idea of a petition to be told, but she put it off for another day and invited him to come to one more banquet before she revealed what her petition was. And so that's kind of an interesting maneuver to make sure that they were listening and paying attention, I think, to what she was saying, and making them even more curious and more desirous to hear what she had to say, and than what it would have been if it would just been one banquet that she invited them to. And I also find it interesting that I guess they had several courses to their meal, with it being a banquet. That sounds about right. But one of the courses evidently involved drinking wine. Now, whether you believe in drinking alcoholic beverages or not, that's not the question. They had that course, which I don't see anywhere where it says that they're drinking an overabundant amount, but usually a little bit of wine will kind of make everybody relaxed and, reasonably friendly. And so I kind of think it was interesting how her petition was coming after they've had some wine to make them reasonable. But anyway, so that's all I have to say about those verses, unless somebody has one more thing. But she has pointed out that she prioritized it. If they were going to live and just be slaves, they could live with that. But just destroying the whole people, all of the people, that was more than she could bear. And that would cause the king to be not in favor with other nations that believed a little bit different. And so I think she was trying to show that it could do damage to his reputation if he allowed that to happen like that. And I could be wrong, because the way it's worded, you can kind of guess for yourself what the king might be thinking and how he would be treated by other people if he let that completely happen. So anyway, any more comments? All right, let's go to verses 5 through 7, please.
What are you talking about? King Ahasuerus demanded. Who would dare touch you? Esther replied, This wicked Haman is our enemy. Then Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. The king jumped to his feet and went out into the palace garden as Haman stood up to plead for his life to Queen Esther, for he knew that he was doomed. How many did you say? Verses?
7.
Okay. That was it.
I think you were reading it okay. So, okay, we'll go on ahead and start, read verses 5 through 7, if you would, Dave.
Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther, the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king.
Thank you. And mine says, And then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, Who is he, and where is he who dares presume in his heart to do that? And Esther said, An adversary and an enemy, even this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. And the king rose from the feast in his wrath, and went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make a request for his life to Queen Esther, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. All right. What comments do you all have?
Looks like the king had to go somewhere to gather his thoughts, and instead of to control his emotions, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that? I agree. I think he had sometimes when we get really angry, it's kind of like when you have people fussing at one another, you send each child to their room or something to chill out or cool off, and then you deal with it. Then you're more likely to deal appropriately instead of out of emotion. So it sounds to me like he was trying to get his anger under control, and he was trying to decide exactly what's the right way is to handle this, because Haman had tricked him in getting him to sign an agreement that if there were people out there that did not bow before Haman, that they would be killed. And, I don't think Ahasuerus really thought in detail what that meant and entailed, but once he'd sealed it with the seal, he couldn't unseal it. But he could do there are a few things, an option that he could have done, and he does do that after a while. But so you stop and think about it. Queen Esther was his favorite of all the virgins that came before him to try to be the new queen to replace Vashti. And Esther, everything she did, everything she looked like, everything about her, he liked. He liked her the best of all, and he chose her to be the next queen. Well, that would not have gone over well after he chose her to be the queen, for him to allow her and her people to be slaughtered. And so that would have messed up his reputation of being just and fair and true. And so he didn't realize he had been tricked into something like this. So anyway, now, we could tell he's been tricked because he didn't have a clue who would order such a horrible thing, even though he sealed it with his signature ring. They had a wax that they would put on, like document that they were signing, and the king would put his signature in there, his indention of the ring in that, to seal it, to say, okay, this is it. This is the way it's going to be done. But he didn't stop and think and realize what Haman was really asking him to do. And so, anyway, if there are any other comments before we go on to the next group of verses? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, this chapter is only 10 verses long, so we only have verse 8 through 10 left to go. So, Josie, will you read those last 3 verses, please?
In despair, he fell upon the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king returned from the palace garden. Well, will he even rape the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? The king roared. Instantly, the death veil was placed over Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the king's aides, said, "Sir, Haman has just ordered a 75-foot gallows constructed to hang Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. It stands in Haman's courtyard. Hang Haman on it," the king ordered. So they did, and the king's wrath was pacified.
Thank you. Dave?
Verse 8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed wherein Esther was. Then said the king, "Will he force the queen also before me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, "Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him thereon." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified.
Thank you. And mine puts it this way: when the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of drinking of wine, Haman was falling upon the couch where Esther was. Then said the king, "Will he even forcibly assault the queen in my presence, in my own palace?" As the king spoke the words, the servants covered Haman's face. Then said Harbona, one of the attendants serving the king, "Behold, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, whose warning saved the king, stands at the house of Haman." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. Anybody got comments?
This is just a small example of history repeating itself over and over, even up till today. And but we really won't see this kind of stuff until I don't know, when it comes time to right now the enemy of God is hiding behind a lot of things, and they're just not coming out right now and saying what's in their heart, what they would like to do. But I believe that it's going to come to the point where they will come out and say exactly what's on their heart, against the things of God, against the people of God, and it's going to backfire.
Yes.
That's all I can tell you, because God's will is being done through the Old Testament, and it continues to be done in the New Testament. And God is going to have his way. So there you have it. It's not the end. It's the end of that mind of Antichrist. That Antichrist mind is coming to an end. And we can't have prosperity as a whole country. You can't have prosperity and God blessing everybody when you got people working behind the scenes against God. So, we're just seeing an example, a small example of what happens to those who come against God.
Amen.
Well, it was all about deception. Haman deceived the king, and he didn't like it because it was so simple, because he was in charge, and he trusted him, and that was the most thing that really angered the king, was, he trusted him too. And that's just why nowadays, we trust the people that are signed to, government stuff, and they're deceiving the people, and they're going on with their own agenda, And so right now, everything's being found out here too, and it has to be adjusted and brought up and dealt with, and that's what President Trump is doing. I think that's my own opinion.
Well, those are very good comments. I appreciate your comments. I think it's interesting how God, in each situation, he turns what the enemy or enemies think they're going to accomplish that would be bad against God's people, but for God's people, God turns it around to be good for them. And so here's another instance here where first the king had to be made aware of the deception and learn the truth and realize what that truth meant could happen. And then that gave an open door to figure out what can be done, because once it was sealed, an order was sealed with the signet ring of the king, it was not allowed to be changed. However, a person could add things to it. And so we will find out later on how they're going to fix this dilemma, because right now it looks like God's people and the queen are going to lose their lives, and they won't even be able to defend themselves. So that will also lose their honor. So it's not just their lives, it's their honor. So it's just like being slaughtered at the slaughterhouse. Anyway, so that was bad. Well, we have a few more minutes, but we don't have enough to go through all of chapter 8. So I'm thinking let's just go and read the first 6 verses of chapter 8 and see how far we get. But I doubt if we'll get finished with chapter 8 today. It's just chapter 7 was really, really short, and I think we need to make our study a little bit longer than that. So, Josie, would you read verses 1 through 6 of chapter 8, please?
Okay. On that same day, King Ahasuerus gave the estate of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king that he was her cousin and foster father. The king took off his ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, appointing him prime minister, and Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's estate. And now once more Esther came before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop Haman's plot against the Jews. And again the king held out the golden scepter to Esther. So she arose and stood before him and said, "If it please your majesty, and if you love me, send out a decree reversing Haman's order to destroy the Jews throughout the king's providence. For how can I endure it, to see my people butchered and destroyed?"
Thank you. All right, Dave, verses 1 through 6 of chapter 8, please.
On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, she had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people, or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?"
Thank you. The Amplified says, "On that day King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Queen Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her," how they were related. "And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again to the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to avert the evil plot of Haman the Agagite, and his scheme that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out to Esther the golden scepter. So Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all of the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how shall I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" Any comments? I want to remind us how in chapter 1, verse 1, it tells that Ahasuerus reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. And from what we just read, that was a lot of territory and a lot of provinces, and from what we just read, there was Jews living in each and every one of them. So that would be a lot of Ahasuerus' kingdom, the people in it, that would be destroyed. So that was something to consider as well. So he would have people in 127 provinces who were acquainted with these Jews, who would be upset over the order of having to kill their friends and their neighbors. And so, and that, I don't know what percentage that would have been of all the people in those places, but there were a lot of people involved. It wasn't just like a small city. It was 127 provinces, which is bigger than a city. And it would be an interesting study to study and find out just how big most average provinces were, how many people dwelled there, and what percentage of them were Jew. That would be interesting if someone was interested enough to study that. So I didn't get around to doing that, and I apologize. I should have, but it didn't happen. So anyway, so not only would his favorite woman that he chose to be the replacement of Vashti and to be the queen over all of his provinces, not only would it affect her life and cause her to be killed, but all of her people that were located in all these 127 provinces. That's a lot of people. So, you know, that was something very serious to be considering how to deal with the situation, because he already put a seal on it, and you couldn't change it once it was sealed. You could add to it, but you couldn't change it. So I think we have enough time to do verses 7 through 11, and we'll see what happens next, and then we'll probably have to save the rest of it for another Wednesday. But Josie, verses 7 through 11, please.
Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, the Jew, I have given Esther the palace of Haman, and he has been hanged upon the gallows because he tried to destroy you. Now go ahead and send a message to the Jews, telling them whatever you want to in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, so that it can never be reversed. Immediately the king's secretaries were called in. It was now the 23rd day of the month of July, and they wrote as Mordecai dedicated a decree to the Jews and to the officials, governors, and princes of all the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 in all. The decree was translated into the languages and dialects of all the people of the kingdom. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed the message with the king's ring, and sent the letters by swift carriers, riders on camels, mules, and young dormitories used in the king's service. This decree gave the Jews everywhere permission to unite in the defense of their lives and their families, to destroy all the forces opposed to them and to take their property.
Okay, thank you. Dave, will you read the same verses, please? 7 through 11.
Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month Sivan, on the 23 day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies, and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, and 127 provinces. Unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey.
Thank you. All right, the Amplified says, Then the king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him have they hung upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write also concerning the Jews, as it pleases you, in the king's name, and seal it with king's signet ring. For writing which is in the king's name and sealed with this king's ring, no man can reverse. Then the king's scribes were called in the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and to the chief rulers and the governors and princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province in their own script, and to every people in their own language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. He wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by messengers on horseback, riding on swift steeds, mules, young dromedaries used in the king's service, and bred from royal studs. And I think dromedaries are a type of camel, I believe. In it the king granted the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to slay, and to wipe out any armed force that might attack them, their little ones and women, and to take the enemy's goods for spoil. Do we have any comments? This will be our last bunch of comments for the night. And then we have to wait till next week to find out what else happens.
Well, it's another history lesson of what happens, and when you have evil in power and have set up things, the same things they have set up could one day be used against them. And so, you look at things today, and vaccines and AI, data centers and whatnot, all this technology could either be good for us or it could be bad for us. It all depends on who's in power to use those things. And so God, the plan of God is to change people's minds and hearts so that he would have people working to bring about the kingdom of God, and that would be the good for everybody, because that's what God is all about. He's about life, not death and slavery and you know, all that stuff that's contrary to God. It's so we're learning. This is what happens when you have people without God in control of a lot of things. It could be hell on earth.
Yep.
But God wants to have heaven on earth.
Right. Any other comments? No? Okay. Well, we all know that Satan told God that he was going to and fro across the earth to see who he could devour, and he has men with evilness in their heart that make themselves available to Satan to use for bad reasons. And so sometimes it looks like it's really, really going to be a bad thing. But in this case, the king, because even though he was tricked into doing something that he never, if he had fully understood what he was doing, he wouldn't have done, he gave it to them. You know, he had already sealed what he'd already done, so they couldn't change that. They could only add to it. And so they had to get some people together that had wisdom to know how to word it to where it would be an honorable thing. And so they made a decree to where the Jews were allowed to defend themselves, because before they were just to be they weren't allowed to defend themselves against who was coming to kill them. And now they're allowed to do that if they choose to. And so it restored honor to the people rather than just them laying down and letting themselves be slaughtered. It gave them the opportunity to defend themselves and their families. And so I thought that was pretty wise of them to do it that way, and then seal it with the seal so that that part could not be undone either. So they'd get a chance to defend themselves. I want to read, unless you have other comments about it, I would like to read a little paragraph that this is, I'm assuming Joyce Meyer probably wrote this, because this is one of her the Bibles where she puts Bible notes in amongst the scriptures. She's not adding to the scriptures. She's just doing like what we're doing, taking a scripture, reading what's there, and telling her viewpoint. And this is her kind of summary of what we just read. It said, Esther had worshipped God by her obedience and willingness to stay in a situation that was unpleasant for her, meaning in the king's palace as queen, because she was a young girl. She had hopes and dreams for her future, and it suddenly got all changed according to the king's will. But she went on ahead and did what God would have her to do, which indirectly was the king's will, only the king didn't know it. And she was willing to lay aside her plan and accept God's plan for her life, even though she did not understand it for a period of time. She didn't realize her act of obedience, the effect that it was going to have. And each act of obedience is a type of worship that God does not ignore. When we keep our eyes on God and stand firm in faith, continue to worship, and hold fast a good confession, we will always see the devil's plan for evil in our lives work for our good and to his demise, just as Esther did. And that makes me think of that old saying, somebody cutting off their nose to spite their face. And that's what the enemy does. He doesn't realize it until it's all said and done, because God will have God's will done. It may not look like it first. And sometimes it looks darkest right before dawn. Sometimes it looks like there's not going to be a victory for the good people, the ones that are trying hard to do things God's way. And it'll look pretty dark sometimes. But God always ends up with the victory. Not necessarily the way we expect it, but he gets the victory. And when he gets the victory, his people get the victory. So we praise God for the victories that he has given us so far, that he's working on giving us now, and that in the future he plans to give us. And we just thank you for his plan, because his is the best plan there ever was. And whether we understand it or not, that's the bottom line. Any other comments before we go on to prayer requests? Okay. Do we have any praise reports or prayer requests? Either one.